Hi, I'm Sam,
And I'm Andrew.
and this is Teen Stock Politics. I'm back. Sorry I was gone for that week. I had some important stuff to do, but we're back here, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In a brief intro, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a military policy introduced by the Clinton administration that barred gay and lesbian and bisexual militants and combatants from disclosing their sexual orientation. And the reason we're doing this today is as the time this video comes out on the 7th of on the 20th of July. I'm sorry. In 2 days, on the 22nd of July, is the date that the bill to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell has passed through Congress as of 11 years ago. So that's a brief intro to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So yeah, any thoughts about this policy, Andrew?
Well, I think that the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, I think the whole point of why it was put into place, which I think this could be debated, but the main reason was to separate people that were straight and I considered regular back in the day, which today some people would still consider it that. Of course, we are more open nowadays and more progressive than we used to be 30... No, it wasn't 30 years ago. Well, it was about 30 years ago. And they were trying to separate the LGBTQ community versus everyone else. And it was supposed to help the LGBTQ community from being discriminated against because they were different from everyone else. And I don't really think that was the right step. And the reason I say that is because you're supposed to teach others to treat others similar and to teach each other to treat others equally and not to separate people. Because when you separate people, they don't learn to treat each other equally. And I think that's something that they didn't understand back in 1993 when this was signed into law. Yes, it was a Democrat, and he was a moderate Democrat, more progressive than his Republican colleagues. But compared to today, he was very conservative compared to the Democrat base today. And if he was a Democrat president, he probably wouldn't have signed this into law. In today's terms, at least.
Yeah,
I think. Go ahead.
I think your point is very similar to what I was thinking. I was thinking that it was more or less a kind of a military stunt, so people wouldn't get bad. So especially more conservative people wouldn't get mad at the military for not taking action against these quote unquote like weird homosexuals, I guess, that were quote unquote infiltrating the military. I think so it's a pretty similar point. It was very much more of a stunt than it was I think a purposeful act.
And we're still seeing repercussions of it today, even. Because people that are being discriminatory against people in the LGBTQ community are being kicked out of the military. Or if they don't think that LGBTQ, like trans people, shouldn't be in the military, they've been asked to leave for sharing that viewpoint. And yes, it's important for everyone to show their viewpoint, but if it's specifically if it's specifically supposed to be discriminatory against other people that are different from you, then I think saying those things are hurtful to other people, and I think it's okay to kick them out of the military. If you swear at someone, you can get kicked out of a building sometimes, especially in schools and then in other places. So it does depend on what you say. And I saw an interview on One American News Network, I think it was yesterday, and it was Matt Gaetz. He was talking about he was introducing legislation to the House that was banning people from being banned from the military and kicked out because of what they say. But also at the same time, I'm thinking, is this your priority? People are still dying from COVID-19, and your priority is making sure people don't get kicked out of the military from being discriminatory against other people? Because at the end of the day, people should not be discriminating against other people. So to say that it's okay to do that, I think, is really going to hurt a lot of people in that community. And Matt Gaetz' state is literally 20% of the COVID cases that are happening right now in the country are from Florida, Matt Gaetz' home state. So he should be prioritizing COVID-19, which is in his state that he is from and representing. So his priorities need to be in check.
Yeah, I think these distractions, especially coming from, stemming from Don't Ask, Don't Tell, are very damaging to the military right now, as the military is kind of forced to take sides, and unfortunately partisan politics on whether or not they're going to allow these people to get in to the military or not. And so it's just, and by these people I'm meaning all of these groups, the people who are being discriminative, or the people who are homosexual, right? So it's a very interesting situation that it's gotten to, which is certainly not benefiting the military or the country whatsoever, on either side.
Right. And you said on either side because, in terms of politics at least, a lot of the LGBTQ communities on the left side of the political spectrum with Democrats. Of course, that's not always true, because we have Caitlyn Jenner running as a Republican, and she's part of the LGBTQ community. So, at least most of the time, it is the case that they are a Democrat or on the left wing of the political spectrum. But if we go back to 2010, when there was the vote to amend this, or to amend and repeal this policy, this was a bipartisan issue. Yes, there were several Republicans that did vote to keep the policy in place, but there were also several that voted to repeal this policy. Every single Democrat that voted, there were several that didn't actually vote, but all the Democrats that voted voted at all, voted to repeal it. And there were 3 or 4 Republicans that also voted. So this is a bipartisan issue. And it at least back to 10 years ago in 2010. And like I said, we're still feeling those repercussions today from that policy. So I think it's very important to understand that both sides of the aisle wanted to do something about this policy, and it was done back in 2010, and then of course Obama signed it into law repealing this policy.
I think it's about time, though, that we move on to our next segment, kind of the history of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and kind of why it was, as we already stated, kind of why it was in place, and then we'll start to move on if it helped or not. I think for the history of Don't Ask, Don't... Actually, I'm just going to cut this out, Andrew. I think we can skip this. So we're going to talk about if Don't Ask, Don't Tell helped or not. And I think, during the time that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was kind of in play, I think as we talked about earlier, the main goal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell is so that conservatives wouldn't get frustrated that homosexuals were inside the military, and it's still kind of up for debate on whether or not it helped. So, do you have any thoughts, Andrew?
I personally don't believe that it helped, because I was talking earlier at the beginning about how they were just separating these two communities, and separating people in the past has not helped. Back when there was a bunch of civil rights issues, and there still are today, but it was a lot bigger back in the day, where people of different races couldn't even drink from the same water fountains. Separating these two races didn't help the issue. Separating two communities based on their sexual orientation did not help the issue. Because the whole point of it was, so no one knows that you are gay, so then nothing can happen. But if you actually tell someone that you're gay, then you get kicked out. So, like I said, they are separating these communities, and there's no doubt about it. So I don't think this is helping at all. This could help some people that are straight and they're anti-LGBTQ. Also, at the same time, they need to get over it. We are in a new era where we are accepting of other people and what they believe in, whether their religion, their race, or their ideologies. We are accepting of these different people. So to be anti something, anti this, anti that, they need to get over it. And at the end of the day, we're all Americans. Anyone that wants to serve the country, regardless of your sexual orientation, should be able to. So I don't think this policy helped whatsoever, and I'm glad it was repealed back in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And of course put into place in 2011.
Yeah. It was good of you to mention. It was very wise of you to mention the fact that it could have possibly, like, aided the hatred that that especially conservative Republicans had towards the LGBTQs in the military. I think it kind of served it as a fact. Like, it kind of served that the Republican belief that the military is their military, that kind of, especially as we've seen with a lot of the recent Black Lives Matter movements, that their guns should be controlled by them, like that their armed forces should be controlled by the Republicans, and I think that did reinforce their idea. But even at the same time, the whole point is to be cross-partisan to serve the best for the country, and sometimes that always doesn't have to be cross-partisan, but it's like you just gotta either like cut the crap about the whole like the whole homophobia and whatever, but or you gotta just go home. Like it's gonna happen. You gotta just stop being discriminative, or like it's not gonna help anyone, the military or your pride.
Right, and we haven't even mentioned about how Donald Trump played into this policy again by banning transgender individuals from serving in the military. And this didn't help our country move forward. And of course, Biden did eventually repeal that in his executive order that he signed, I think the day he was inaugurated. But a lot of what Republicans have done, like I said, it was a bipartisan issue back in 2010 when the Senate voted on it. Several Republicans voted to repeal it, but those same Republicans are still support the president now, even after the policy that he put in place, banning transgender individuals from serving in the military. So I think a lot of these Republicans are contradicting themselves. By back 10 years ago, they supported the policy of repealing it, and now they support a former president, that supported putting back a policy banning transgender individuals from going into the military. So I think these Republicans really need to check. Am I willing to support a president that supports the opposite of what I don't support? Do I support a president that wants transgender individuals not to serve in the military while I actually believe that they should? And they really need to check themselves. A lot of these Republicans need to check themselves. And yes, there weren't too many Republicans that voted for it, but a lot of the Republicans that voted back in 2010, they're still they're still in the Senate today.
Yeah, it's disappointing to see the kind of the flip of of what the military should spend more time on. Should they spend more time on just listening to these dumb arguments of how homosexuals shouldn't be in the military, or should they start focusing on the issues that matter? And I think it's kind of disappointing especially the Republican side, to have to keep kind of pushing this while they say they support the military. They do weird they act like it's their military, as I was saying earlier. So it's just forethought.
And another thing that you were going back to earlier when you were talking about how transgender individuals and other people that were gay, lesbian, or other forms in the LGBTQ community, you were talking about how conservatives don't want them handling their guns, and they want people that are straight and like them to be protecting America. But at the end of the day, all because you are gay doesn't mean you're not mentally well. You just believe differently and you feel differently in your sexual orientation. So to think that they're going to be less safe with their guns, I think it's not right to think that. And at the end of the day, if you are someone that is an American and you believe that America needs to have a good standing in the world, and you want to join the military and risk your life, you should be able to do it, regardless of your sexual orientation or whatever you believe in. So I really think that putting this policy, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, really held us back. I think that former President Trump, putting the policy banning transgender individuals from being in the military, I think really held us back. So I really, really think that the argument for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I think is very flawed, and they really need to check themselves, or those who support it. Yes, I'm a Democrat. Yes, a Democrat signed this into law, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to follow along and support everything a Democrat has done. And yes, that was 30 years ago. The Democrat Party has changed. Every single Democrat that voted for the repeal, just as a Democrat's president signed it, repealing it. So all because a Democrat signed it into law doesn't mean I'm going to support it, and it's not right, and it wasn't morally right back then either. It was it was different back then in the time because people thought that different types of people were different levels depending on how you were born, depending on how you looked. And that has changed. It needs to change even more. That's why Black Lives Matter is here, trying to make sure that different races are equal and making sure that everyone understands that. So I believe that we need to get rid of all that hatred, so anybody that wants to can serve in the military, and anyone that wants to can serve different positions, not just because of how they feel or how they look. It's actually about their mental well-being and how intelligent you are.
The one good thing that came out of this whole ordeal was the show of small bipartisan support for the repeal, as both parties showed kind of crossed the lines on this and showed sympathy to the other side. A slight sympathy. It's not to exaggerate this, but it's good that these when something is obviously morally wrong, that in the House at least, that people will that these Congress people will work for the right thing if need be, and I think that shows a message that they won't put an eye into stupidity when it's for doing the right thing, or at least all the time.
Right, and if we're actually looking into exactly who voted for it, we have Susan Collins in Maine, Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, we have Richard Burr in North Carolina. There was one more, I don't remember who it was, but he was not one that voted to convict President Trump. Of course, the ones I have named eventually turned on their president, voting to convict him. And another thing I will mention is even, like, a lot of more progressive, they're not progressive, they're still conservative, but for the Republican Party, they're more progressive. Even John McCain didn't vote for it. And he's John McCain, and he likes to work with the other party. So I think that a lot of Republicans that voted to keep the policy, yes, times have changed since 10 years ago, but back then there was a clear message that this is not okay to have that policy in place. So a lot of Republicans need to really check themselves.
Yeah, and I think to wrap this up, we're going to talk a little bit about the aftermath and kind of the impact of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It certainly kind of left a mark on what America is willing to do for some dumb reasons sometimes. And I think it's good that America can see these errors and push through this indiscriminative behavior, so that to work to bring the country into a right direction, I think.
Right, and I think at the end of the day, repealing this and actually having this policy in place for 20 years, not quite 20 years, just about, I think at the end of the day there will still be much divisiveness between to communities. I do think if this hadn't been in place and there was another policy enforcing the fact that anyone can serve in the military, regardless of who you are, and if you were American or not. Of course, if you're not American, you can't serve, so the statement, regardless of who you are, is a little misleading. I think if there was a policy like that, we could have moved forward in the divisiveness between communities. However, at the end of the day, I think regardless, if there had not been a policy in place at all, we would probably be in a very similar place where there are certain people that still believe that certain community is more superior to another one. So yes, having a different policy in place could have helped us have a step forward back in the 1990s. But having no policy at all versus having Don't Ask, Don't Tell finally being repealed in 2010, I don't really think it helped or hurt very much because we would still be in the same place regardless, I think.
Yeah. So I think that wraps it up around for about this episode. It was a very interesting situation that we had here, and I'm glad we could cover it. So as I said earlier in the episode, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal was approved by Congress on the 22nd of July, 2010, and so we're celebrating the 11th anniversary. So, thank you guys. Thanks for joining. This is Teen Talk Politics. We'll talk to you later.
Make sure
Bye.
to tune in on Friday.
Yep.